My name is Damon Fout. I'm a technical account engineer here at Learn On Demand Systems.
And I'm AJ Artizone. I'm also a technical account engineer with Learn On Demand. And this is the time and money section. We're focusing on the tools and features in LOD to help you guys build your labs quicker, more efficiently, and keeping an eye on reusability for the future.
We do have quite a bit to cover. So if we could post our questions in the chat, we'll answer as many as we can during QA at the end, or if we have time, we may get to some in the middle of the session. And on that note, let's get rolling.
But real quick, a message from our sponsors.
That's right. As you attend the sessions between today, the rest of today and tomorrow, don't forget to snap a picture. You can be in it if you want to, but you don't have to be. And post it to LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, what have you. Say that you're attending today's sessions, or this quarter's sessions, and make sure you tag Learn On Demand Systems. We will be choosing random posts, and you could get a gift card or other swag. And who doesn't love swag? Today in the session, we're going to be covering the new developer experience. If you sat in Corey's keynote, you saw it showed off a little bit there. We're also going to talk about the reuse of lab components, the sharing and transferring of lab instances, lifecycle actions, and then your organization's private gallery. Our new lab developer experience is being unveiled at this event and will go to general availability very soon. It has been designed with speed in mind. Lab developers will now be able to create a new lab in as few as 3 clicks and some typing. The gallery has a lot to offer, and here are a few of the top features. The public and private galleries, where private galleries only being available to your organization, and the public gallery being created and maintained by us, available for anyone to use. Create and preview, where preview will launch the lab so you can see if the lab will work for your needs. When you find what you're working for, what you're looking for, head back to the gallery and click create. Additionally, once you've created a lab profile that you'd like to reuse, you can self-publish your profiles to your organization's private gallery for easy setup of future labs. And that's about enough talk, so let's get right into the demos.
All right, so I'm sure most of you are fairly familiar with the LOD interface. As you may have seen over the last couple of months, we've updated your initial login screen. So instead of coming into the admin page like you're used to, now you're starting to come into your dashboard. And from the keynote today, Corey did unveil some new pieces that are going to be coming on here in the future, where you'll be able to customize what you're seeing and have more direct access to tools and information. But for right now, the main thing we want to do is show you the new lab gallery, which you can access by clicking this Create Lab Profile button right on your dashboard. And when that comes in, by default, you're going to have no filter set, which you can see the available filters on the left-hand side of the screen. And you'll have access to all of the public images, as you can see what's right here. And once you start building out some lab profiles and customizing them, you'll be able to get your own private organization ones. Taking a quick look at the tiles here, we have both the create and preview options. And again, Corey showed this off a bit earlier, but when you click preview, it's just going to immediately launch the lab and let you take a look and poke around at it. Make sure it's actually the one you want that's going to fit your needs for your lab. When you're ready and you decide on the one you want, you can go ahead and click the create button to begin building your lab. For this demo, I'm going to be picking the Windows 10 version 2004 right here at the top, and it does come installed with Visual Studio Code. We'll click create. Now I need a couple of bits of information for the lab profile creation. So we'll start by giving it a number. I'm just going to call it 00. And I'm going to give it a name, launch demo. Description is up to you. I'm going to leave it blank because we don't really need anything here, but you could fill it in with what you intend to do with the lab or things you have installed on it. Now you have the ability to select what lab series you want to put this profile in. If you already have one existing, you can click this choose one, but for this organization we don't, so we're going to create one from scratch. We need to give it a name, so again I'm just going to stick with launch demo, lab series. From there, now you have your expected duration and your maximum duration. We get a lot of questions about what these two fields actually mean. So let's expand on that, or explain what that means. So for the expected duration, this is what we're looking at, what you think the estimated time for a student the average student, I should say, to complete your lab steps. You can set it anywhere from 15 minutes. You could set it to 3 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever you think it needs to do to complete your specific lab. Now, the maximum duration, though, this is the one that actually shows up in the lab UI and the timer in the upper right hand corner. This one allows you to go double the up to double the expected duration. Sorry. And this is so you can build in some buffer to lab access for interruptions during your class or students that work slower than what you would expect them to. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to 120 for double, and then we'll click OK. And now the LOD has spun up this lab profile. You can take a look and see some of the pieces in here. We've got our VM, we've got a network, and we can see where the lab profile was created based on. At this point, this is where you need to start thinking about the different pieces that go in to make up your lab and how you need to approach setting it up for to get to successfully complete your lab and meet all the requirements of it, but also how you could reuse some of these pieces in the future. So if we dive into what's actually in the lab profile, you can see you have the networks, which this is set up on a per lab profile basis. The virtual machines, so you have the virtual machines here, and inside of that, all the information is contained in a virtual machine profile. In the virtual machine profile, you can set things such as the username and password that shows up in the UI, how many processors the virtual machine needs, and how much RAM it's going to use. You can also set how many network adapters it has, and you can set the hard disk. You can add multiple hard disks, and you have your disk chain. And at the end here, you have your DVD drive if you need one. We'll pop back out of that. And back here on the lab profile, you also have startup delays, instance data, and your network settings. Removable media, if you need an ISO attached to your lab for installation media, or maybe some specific files the students need to load into their VMs, that's where this would go. And then we have our cloud tab. So here you would add your cloud credentials for M365 tenants per se, or special tenants they need to log into a custom website or a custom tool that you're using. Now, for this lab, what we're going to do is we're actually going to set up a cloud orchestration. I'm going to use Azure. So we'll click that from the cloud platform. And we need to pick our subscription pool, which I already have pre-made, so we'll add that in. Now, this is one of the things that Corey was showing earlier with the data center availability. All of the Azure data centers are marked as available, are are in LOD and usable. So I'm going to pick a couple for this. But you can select it as many or as little as you want, depending on what you're trying to deploy. I'm going to do those 4. And we're going to add our user account, add a quick resource group. I want to change the resource group alias or the replacement token alias, so it's easier to remember when we go to use them as replacement tokens later on. Add permissions, keep it a contributor. Now, this is the first thing we want to start thinking about for reuse in this, our ARM template. Now, I already have one pre-made, so I'm just going to attach it here, but we'll go over and take a look at it. So to find it, we'll go over here to resource templates, and we'll search. We only have the one. But when we open it up, you can see we have all the JSON in here that we need. And a lot of times when you export these from Azure, they'll have all the names and account values preset in the ARM template. But one of the best things, but what you want to do is take those types of data points that Azure requires during the deployment, and you want to set them as parameters. So in this instance, with storage accounts, we have 2 different types of parameters set aside: the account name and the account type. By looking at this real quick, you can see the account name is there, and Azure in particular has a restriction in place on the type of names you can use, and also they have to be unique. So you have to have some sort of unique identifier on there. So we really can't keep a default value or pre-select our name for the deployment. However, when you go to the account type, you'll see we do have a default value in here as standard LRS, and that's really this Azure's default setting for storage accounts. That being said, there are some other options you can pick depending on the type of storage account you need and the application you're using. So when we're setting up our parameters, we set them up in the JSON like this, but then when we come into LOD, we can go and set up the parameters page or parameters fields. So there's 2 ways you can do this. You can either add it manually, kind of like this, which is really the hard way to do it, or you can go import your JSON and just copy paste it in here, and LOD will parse the JSON and find it. This one's already set up, so we have storage account name, which we pointed out earlier. And this one is required, as Azure requires this and has special rules around it in order to process the deployment. And also, it can be handy to have the name available to students in the resources tab. So we want to check the display to student box. Then down here at the account type, as I pointed out earlier, it already has a default value, so we don't need anything here, but we can if we want to. So we'll leave the required box unchecked, and then students generally aren't going to care what the account type is, so we can keep that hidden from them. But back over on our lab page, so we've attached it, we have our token alias, and we can edit those parameters. Like we said before, the account name is required. So I'm going to do something pretty basic, just call it store. Now, again, as I set up earlier, we need some sort of a unique identifier. And what LOD allows us to do is use our @lab tokens to do this, and it'll even autocomplete the ones that are available to you. Quite commonly in our ARM or cloud deployments, because you can do this with AWS CloudFormation as well, we use the lab instance ID. The lab instance ID is just the number that's assigned to each individual instance more for record keeping and tracking. But we can plug it in here, and now this becomes our unique identifier. So every time we launch this lab, this is going to deploy a storage account in Azure with the name store and then whatever the number for the lab instance is. And this way, going forward, when you go to reuse this, this will always be there. You don't have to worry about changing your identifier. It'll automatically change for you. And I'm just going to leave the storage account type blank because I'm happy with the default. And finally, because we're doing a cloud deployment, we have to add some sort of an access control policy. This is another directory we can reach out here from our admin page, and we can see what's available for us. When we go take a look, and we'll filter it down by Azure, you can see that we already have a bunch of LOD created access control policies. If anyone's not familiar with what an access control policy is, essentially it's a JSON formatted policy that's submitted to Azure, and it can limit what your users have the ability to do. You can, within LOD, you can either create your own from custom, or you can select one that we already created that covers a lot of common uses. For this case, I can just use the only storage accounts because that's all we need. I'll come back here, click add policy, and select only storage accounts. So we can save that. Then we'll go ahead and give this a launch.
Awesome. So we are covering a lot, especially right there. And we keep hearing about reusing various components. So that begs the question of what can be reused and in what way. So while we're waiting for the lab to spin up, let's take a look at some of the components that we've discussed. The lab profile, where reuse is possible, but offers no significant value as it would create two of the same profile. It can inherit an environment and or content from the parent profile and can be cloned, which will offer the ability to make changes to that profile, the new profile, without affecting the original. VM profiles, ARM templates, and access control policies can be reused, inherited, and cloned as much as you need. Lifecycle actions do not carry over from an inherit and do not have a directory that they can be pulled from. Saving these elsewhere or stealing them from your old lab profile and using the tried and true copy and paste is the reusability here. Removable media can't be cloned as it is an ISO, and that also offers no value. So when we say reusable, inheritable, and clonable, those need to be defined as well, which we've done. When we clone, we create a new profile that can be altered and edited as needed. This new profile does not affect the original. That's very important. Reuse of a profile, for example, a VM profile, is one of the best ways to save time. When reusing a VM in multiple lab profiles, however, any change to one of those will affect the VM in all of the lab profiles. And inheritance, a lab can inherit some components from a parent lab, such as the environment or just the content. Changes can only be made to the parent, but does affect all children. These are terrific ways of saving time, and each one absolutely has its value depending on your needs.
All right.
AJ, do you have any examples there?
Well, actually, you know what? I think I'm just going to show you how it works in LOD. Obviously, this lab we launched is not quite done, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and move ahead. So when you go into the edit profile. Maybe. There it goes. Okay, so when you go in here, a lot of people don't pay attention to this, but down here at the bottom, there's this nifty Save As button. And so when you click it, now suddenly you can create a new lab profile. And again, we can change the number, we can change the name. So I'm going to change this to with ARM. But now we have some options outside of the series and organization if you need to change those. We can clone these, as Damon has said. So if we clone that, that means we'll get an entire new lab profile. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick. And we'll just leave the copy here. You'll see it's asking me about what do you want to call the new VM. So we'll leave that. And so now if you go back to the lab series, you'll see that we have our original lab profile, a second lab profile with our modification to the name. But then down here, more importantly, under the virtual machines, you'll see we have the original one, and then we have a second one that we've just made called the copy. And this one, and each one has one usage. So when you look at the VM profile, you can come down here and see it's used by our launch demo with ARM. And now anytime you edit this lab profile, this virtual machine will be the one that's affected if you capture new diff disks. So let's go back up here. And once again, we'll go to edit profile. We'll do another save as, and this one we'll call it O2. And instead of copy, we'll call this the reuse one. We'll click the reuse button, and we'll click OK. So now you see O2, launch demo, ARM, reuse, and you'll see the copy VMs listed here. And so if we go back to our lab series, we have 3 lab profiles, but check this out. Down here under the virtual machines, we have our copy, but now it has 2 usages. And if you check the VM profile, down here under the used by, you can see it's used by our original clone. And then we also have our reuse profile that we just made. And now one more time, we'll go here. We'll go down, we'll click Save As. We'll get rid of the copy. And this time we'll call it Inherit, as that's what we're going to do. And if I can spell it. One day I'll figure that out. I'll click Inherit. Now this time you'll see we popped up another series of boxes. And now it wants to know, what are you inheriting from the original lab profile? And initially it's just going to ask you about the environment. So do you want the virtual machine? Do you want the networks? And do you want the cloud resources? If with all 3 of those checked, we can click OK. And now we're back to our new lab profile page. And you'll notice this box, this little warning right here, tells you that this lab profile is a child of the earlier one. And if you click this link, it'll take you back to the parent so you can see what's going on there. And if you look down here through the information, you see we still are using the copy VM, and we're still using our storage template and ACP from earlier. We'll check out the edit lab profile here. A couple of key differences. You'll see this parent box is filled out. And again, that'll link back to your parent profile. And now you have 2 checkboxes, inherit environment and inherit content. So environment covers the boxes we saw earlier during the save as dialog. That's your networks, that's your virtual machines, that's your removable media, that's your cloud deployments. If you go to inherit content, that's your instructions, your activities, scored labs, exams, any attachments you have to the lab profile. All of that stuff is under inherit content. So you can choose whether you want to inherit the environment, inherit the content, or both. Now, next thing to be aware of is, like we said, now you can't actually edit this child profile's environment. So checkbox for the web, for the network, all you can do is turn it on and off. Same thing for the virtual machine, on or off. We don't have removable media, so there's nothing there. But then under the cloud deployment, checking this out, you can change your subscription pool. You can change how it handles failures, but you can't change your data center availability, and you can either turn the deployment on or off. So I can't actually see the chat, but Mike, did that kind of answer your question?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Awesome. So, and now while we're at it, go back to that earlier launch we did. We'll just go sign out and sign into Azure real quick, and we'll show the deployment was successful. Maybe. Oh, there it goes. Now that I've clicked it like 5 times.
The busy bird today.
And so when you look at our resources tab, maybe. Apparently. There we go. So on the resources tab, we have the Azure portal information populated. And you notice we have because we checked it to display to the user, we have the storage account name right here, easily accessed. Type it in, sign in. No, yes. Now I have to remember this is a brand new account, so once it finally finishes signing in, maybe, hopefully AAD's not having trouble again today. There we go. So new user account, it's going to ask you if you want your tour. You can say skip it, and we'll just go to Azure storage accounts. There we go. So you can see we have the storage account deployed, and you'll notice, again, the number matches for the name what we have here, and also the number here on this, more importantly, the number here on the help tab. But, so with that, we'll go ahead and end this lab. All right, so we covered the reuse and the inherit portion. So now we need to move on to the next piece, and I saw in the chat that it was mentioned once or twice already. The LCAs. I'm going to go back here, or lifecycle actions. So as we were talking about earlier, these really aren't inheritable or clonable, as they all just kind of live in the lab profile individually. But what we can do is add them individually and then store them separately, either through GitHub, your own personal file storage, or you can go back and steal them from previous labs. And I'm sure you're wondering a little more in depth on what we have about lifecycle actions here.
Indeed. We have 2 main lifecycle actions. But what a lifecycle action is a feature in LOD that triggers an event during the life of the lab instance. These 2 main features, these 2 main types of LCAs, are sending information and executing scripts. Sending information such as triggering a remote API with lab instance data, sending emails to the user, or most often we see this used for sending a user notification regarding the lab instance, such as successful cloud deployment. The other type of LCA is for executing scripts against the lab fabrics, which include the virtual machines, the cloud, and even containers. Depending on your fabric, we support PowerShell, Windows command line, and Bash.
Okay. So, as Damon was saying, we have several different types of lifecycle actions available. The most common one that we see is executing scripts specifically against either a virtual machine or a cloud platform. Now, the reason you would want to do this is really to save time in your class for your students and your instructors. We can do a number of different things with them. And for this demonstration, what we're going to do is we're going to go down to this action menu here, and we're going to select execute in virtual machine, because all we want to do is run a quick script against the VM to pre-populate some files in the VM for the students. So we'll do a create lab files name. The first real key thing is the different events. Now you'll see in this, there's a little tooltip here that tells you all the different events that you can possibly run an action against. With that being said, the majority of the time you're going to be looking at either post build, first displayable, or tearing down. For executing in cloud platform, you're going to be looking at post build the majority of the time, as that is when your resources are built, but they may not necessarily be completely responsive, but you can still send the command into your cloud platform to get things rolling. First displayable, on the other hand, that's going to be more where you're going to land for executing against a virtual machine. The first displayable means that this is the first time the user is actually able to interact with the virtual machines after pressing launch. Quick note on this one, blocking. By checking this box, if you have a series of LCAs, you can force this LCA to run and complete before everything else does. So if you have a piece that everything else is dependent on, you would want to mark that as blocking to make sure that that is completed and successful before anything else continues. You would target your machine that you're trying to run against. In this case, we only have the one. And now we can take your command types. As Damon said earlier, we have PowerShell, Command Shell, Bash, and we have UI options for both PowerShell and Command Shell if you want the commands to run while the student is in the VM and can see them running. Delay, if you're running against a virtual machine, it's usually a good idea to set a delay so that way you know all the services you're calling are actually up and running after the first displayable mention. You can set this as long as you need to, but keep in mind is in seconds. Generally, I will do 20 seconds or so, depending on what I'm trying to accomplish. Now, your error action. This one's not necessarily a big deal, but more for troubleshooting or cloud deployments is where it's handy. So the log option, all that does is take, if there's a problem with your script and it throws an error, all it does is take that error, toss it in the lab instance data, and doesn't tell anybody, doesn't do anything, it's just there. Second one is notify user. I personally really like this one for development time, because this one, what it'll do when you select it, by default, if your script has an error, it'll take the error that was kicked out and send it into as a message into your lab UI. And that way you can see kind of exactly what's going on when you launch, and then depending on the error, you can address it in that launch before you go again, or you have to go back and fix your script. And finally, there's nlab. Nlab, pretty self-explanatory. It does exactly what it says. If your script fails, the lab instance is immediately ended. Not always the best experience for the student, but if you have a lab that is, especially with cloud deployments, is deploying resources that are absolutely crucial to the lab success, and they fail for whatever reason, you probably don't want students stuck in an instance that isn't going to work for them. So it'd be better just to have it bail out and then have them relaunch. Again, this is one we only use for production and mostly for cloud deployment type labs. But for this, I'm going to go ahead and select notify user. I'm not going to put an error notification in because I'd like to see it if it errors for some reason. I have a pre-set up script here that I'm just going to copy in. And again, just some simple PowerShell to put a folder on the desktop and then put a text file inside of it. So we'll click OK. And we'll click Save. Again, I'm going to be bad and not leave notes and click OK. And we'll launch this one again. And now real quick, while that's launching, are there any fresh questions from the chat, or is everyone still good so far?
If we want to cover Mike's question, he's asking, can I use this to show advanced options like last known good config menu?
As an LCA?
So we have a software that we, had to do domain controller recoveries, and we try to do a sale on that software. So this would be a demo lab with our software to show an Active Directory domain controller recovery, for example.
Right.
So I was thinking of how to get into those advanced options that are pre-execution style, but in a simulation.
I think you could, as long as your software is responsive to PowerShell or the Windows command line. I don't see why you couldn't. It might take some creative coding.
Okay.
I don't think we put any limits on what you can do, as long as it doesn't violate your ACPs or anything for cloud, and whatever you're trying to do will work in PowerShell, Windows command line, or Bash. So any of those three, it should work.
Okay, thank you.
So while we're waiting for the LCA lab to load, we're going to cover one of my favorite topics, which is the lab instance sharing and the lab instance monitoring. Excuse me. Did my slide pop up? Can you guys see that?
Sure did.
All right, good. I didn't think so because it wasn't bright red. Apologies. There we are. Now we have a slide. Sharing and transferring labs. I love all of my slides equally. I really do. But my two favorite are the gallery and the sharing and transferring. This is an awesome feature. When we're talking about sharing and transferring instances, we're talking specifically about the instance that you're working in. Lab instance sharing is the ability to share your instance with another user, but never relinquish ownership. You have the ability to choose what the shared user can do within your instance, and this is most helpful in troubleshooting and quick demonstrations, as the other user will not have to launch a lab and catch up to the point of focus. If necessary, you can add multiple users to the shared experience. Now, lab instance transferring. When the instance is transferred, you have relinquished all control of the instance. This includes capturing diff disks, saving, and ending the instance. This feature is perfect for the global team and can be used when the team is building a single lab, for example, and a handoff from one shift or part of the globe to another is necessary. This saves unnecessary diff disks, so it keeps your storage cleaner, and it saves time as the next dev can jump right in and get working where you stopped.
All right, so let's take a look at this real quick. Now, as Damon said, this is a relatively new feature. And right now, unless you have an organization management role, you would have to reach out to us to turn this on. But in order to check, all you need to do is go to your organization page, which you may not have missed. If from your lab profile, you can just click on your organization name, and it'll bring you to the page. And under basic information, you can see here there's lab instance sharing, sharing authentication provider, and transfers listed right here. If it's enabled, you'll see what your rule set is. You can share with either anyone or within your organization or nobody. Sharing with anyone means anyone with an email address can be shared with. And in your organization, it's someone with another account in your LOD organization that you can share with. Secondly is the authentication provider. If you are going to be sharing with somebody, maybe you don't necessarily want it to be anonymous, so you can choose one of a variety of authentication providers. We have Microsoft account, Google. Those are really the big ones that you can set there. So they have to log in with either an MSA or a Google account in order to access the lab. And finally, down here, lab instance user transfers, yes or no. And now on that note, we're going to go back over here and see this lab. So you'll see the LCA worked. We have our lab folder here, and you have your text document in it. Now, this is obviously a very simple, kind of crude example of what the LCA can do, but you could do things like store files in GitHub and automatically go retrieve them and pull them into your VM. So that way you can update your files without necessarily having to update your VM every time. You could execute things in the cloud. You could upload things to that storage account that we already did, or you could preset some DNS records. Sky's really the limit. And again, like I was saying to Mike earlier, if what you want to do is will respond to PowerShell, Windows command line shell, or Bash, you probably can do it. It just really is dependent on your skills or your amount of time you want to put into developing your LCA. But I do highly recommend it, as you can save tons of time in your classroom and cutting out kind of the mundane steps from your lab. The mundane setup steps by using those scripts. And then again, once you create them, you can always reuse them in another lab and just modify the basic pieces for what you need. And now, since we're here, back to sharing and transferring. So what I'm going to do, you go up here to the hamburger menu, you'll see the share option. And this pops up this dialog when you click it. So again, as I told you, all you really need is an email address. So I'm going to share this lab instance with Damon, Tooth Nomad. And then you have an option, a few options actually, but the first one is how long do you want them to have access to this lab instance? So you can set their access expiration to when the lab ends. So when somebody closes the lab or you close the lab, or you can set it to a particular date and time. So for instance, I could set this to today at 6 p.m. So roughly 2.5 hours from now, That's 6 p.m. Eastern, so that's my time. Keep in mind this will always show you the time that is set to you on your profile, on your user profile in LOD. I'm going to go back and do when the lab ends, but keep in mind the particular time is pretty neat to have on occasion. The next part is permissions. How much permission do you want them to have to your lab profile? Do you just want them to check it out? Then you don't need to give them anything. Do you want them to be able to make changes? Let them save differencing disks. Do you want them to be able to edit the instructions? Edit lab instructions. Edit activity. Edit lab profile data. All these things. Or if you check everything, that means they will have the exact same permission set as you. So I'll go ahead and click share. And now on the other end of this, Damon's going to have to log in and check his email, but he should be getting an email with a link to this lab. And now the last part of this is down here you have existing shares. So this means you can share with more than one person and you can give them different levels of permission and time. And then you can always delete their access when you decide that they don't need it anymore. So I'll close this. And if you look in the background, Damon's already clicking away, moving stuff around. So imagine what you could do with troubleshooting with somebody through this or developing your lab as a group. And now the final thing, we'll go back to transfers here. Again, go to the hamburger menu. We're going to click transfer. And I'm going to put his email address in there. But I do want to show you how you can tell first. So if you come back to this, not that one, this one, I think. Yep. So if you come back to your lab profile that you were working in, so you can see it's running. This is my lab instance. If I click find lab instances, you'll see down here, this is my user account for this lab instance, and it's there and it's running. So now when I come over here to back to the share, I put in his email address, I click next. It's going to confirm that I want to send this to him. So I'll click transfer. Now that kicks me out of the lab, so because I no longer have access or control over it. And if I come back into the lab instance page and refresh this, you'll see that now Damon, he owns that lab. And he still has it running and it's all his, and I can go back to the main page and I can launch a fresh one if I need to. So how's that? Everyone cool on how that works?
I still love that. That is such a cool thing to me. So I
right.
think publishing to the demo, publishing to the private organization gallery.
Yep. Yep, that's exactly where we are. So now we've gone through all this. We've set up your organization. We've created a new lab profile from the template gallery. We've added an ARM template for a cloud deployment, and we've added a lifecycle action to make some things easier in the future on launches. So now that you've done all this, you've kind of decided, you know what, I like the way this goes. Let's, put this in our gallery so for future use when we're building future labs. So in order to do that, all we need to do is go into the Edit Lab profile. We'll click Advanced. And if you scroll down here, amongst all these checkboxes, there's one here that says Publish to Organization Template Gallery. So when we click this and we save it, now when we go back out here and we'll go back to our dashboard. Now when we go to our gallery, so we'll click that, and we click My Organizations filter, now this lab profile is there.
Awesome.
Oh, but now there's one more thing. So because we have all this nifty filter feature on the end, as you're creating your lab profile, you may want to add some custom filters so you can find your templates that you want. So in order to do that, we're going to go back to our admin page, and we'll come onto the lab profiles section, and we'll click lab tags. Now we can search and see what's already available to us. And in a part of your tags, you can have all the ones that LOD put together already. But for this, we want to do one just for your organization. So we'll click create lab tag. And now the lab tags have to be in your in a certain form, which is the grouping, your tag group, and then your specific filter. So we're going to make one called launch demo, and then we're going to do ARM because we used an ARM template. And again, our organization, and then you need to make sure you click this box that says publish the template gallery and click save. The last step is go back to your lab series. We come in here. This is the one we published. And we go to tags and we click add tag, search. I'm just going to type in launch because there's a bunch of them in there. So we'll click this launch demo. We'll click save. And now for the final time, go back to the template gallery. I'm going to remove my organization filter. But when I refresh the page, you see this new tag set up, launch demo, with the ARM thing, and we click it, and now here's our custom template in your private organization.
Awesome. That is fantastic. I don't know about everybody else, but that's just awesome. So that does conclude our session. If you have more questions or any other questions that we didn't cover yet, you can head over to LOD.1/new-devx, and that covers the new developer experience, or LOD.1/LOD-docs. That covers just about everything else.
And now remember to go back to your class page. You'll see an activity towards the bottom for an evaluation of our session. Please fill it out and let us know what you thought of all this. And if you have any ideas for future LOD features or even development requests, LODS.1/feedback.
Perfect. Specifically telling them that we were the third best presentation that you've seen here this weekend, or this midweek. Oh, right. Apologies, I was getting too far ahead. Don't forget to post to Soch. Take a picture of you or not you attending Launch 2020. Put it up on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and we will get you that gift card to a local ice cream stand. That's not true, but you could win a gift card.